The laptop screen froze mid-sentence. Amara Washington's fingers hovered over the keyboard as snickers rippled through Whitmore Academy's mahogany-paneled lecture hall. Professor Sterling barely lifted his eyes from his notes. "Technical difficulties again, Ms. Washington. Perhaps you should stick to simpler topics." The room fell silent except for the grandfather clock's steady tick. Amara's cheeks burned as she stared at the blue screen of death that had just murdered her presentation on predictive algorithms. Behind her, she heard Madison's whispered comment to her roommate. "Some people just aren't cut out for this level of rigor." Welcome to Beat Stories, where real stories hit back. We don't just tell stories, we expose injustice. Because sometimes, one quiet voice can shake a whole corporation. And one smart move can spark a system-wide change. This is where intelligence meets prejudice, and justice speaks loud. Amara closed the laptop with deliberate calm. Her voice remained steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'll have this resolved by tomorrow, Professor Sterling." See that you do." Sterling's dismissive tone carried the weight of generations who had walked these halls before her. Class dismissed. The sound of expensive leather shoes on marble floors created a symphony of privilege as students filed out. Amara remained seated, watching the last of her classmates disappear through the heavy oak doors. The afternoon light, streaming through stained glass windows, cast colored shadows across her dark skin. A reminder of how different she looked in this place. MIT had seemed like a dream 18 months ago. A full scholarship, early admission, recognition as one of the brightest computer science minds in her graduating class. But this 6-week exchange program at Whitmore Academy was supposed to be the crown jewel. A chance to work with Professor Sterling, whose recommendation could open doors to any graduate program in the country. Instead, it felt like a mistake she couldn't undo. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother in Detroit. "How's the fancy school treating you, baby?" Amara typed back, "Learning a lot." She deleted the message without sending it. The weight of the laptop in her backpack seemed heavier as she walked across the pristine campus. Whitmore Academy had been educating the children of America's elite for over 2 centuries. Every building whispered stories of senators, CEOs, and Supreme Court justices who had once walked these same paths. The smell of old money hung in the air like expensive cologne. Madison was waiting in their shared dorm room, sprawled across her bed with perfectly manicured nails tapping against her phone screen. Her blonde hair caught the light from the window, and her smile was as sharp as her father's hedge fund portfolio. "Rough day?" Madison's voice carried false sympathy. "I heard about your presentation. Technology can be so unreliable." Amara set her bag down carefully. "It happens." "Does it, though?" Madison tilted her head with practiced innocence. "I mean, my laptop's never crashed during a presentation. Neither has anyone else's in my experience." The implication hung between them like smoke. Amara had noticed things. Small things. Her research files mysteriously corrupted after she left the computer lab. Her access card failing to work on the first try. Assignments that somehow got lost in the system. But proof was different from suspicion. "I'm sure it's just bad luck," Amara said, though her mind was already cataloging patterns. The same way she had taught herself to see algorithms in chaos, she was beginning to recognize the subtle architecture of exclusion. Madison's phone chimed. "Oh, speaking of luck, we're having a study group tonight for Sterling's midterm. Just a few of us from the advanced track." She paused, examining her nails. "I'd invite you, but I know you prefer working alone." Amara had never expressed any such preference. In fact, she had repeatedly tried to join study groups, only to find they were always full or canceled at the last minute. With an effort, she pulled herself from the study and left. "That's thoughtful of you," Amara replied, her voice betraying nothing. After Madison left, Amara sat on her narrow bed and opened her laptop. The screen flickered to life, displaying lines of code that would have made her professors at MIT weep with joy. Her algorithm wasn't just sophisticated, it was revolutionary. Machine learning that could predict behavioral patterns with 97% accuracy. She had been working on it for 2 years, refining it in her spare time between classes and her work-study job. The code was elegant, efficient, and entirely her own creation. But here at Whitmore, it might as well have been written in a foreign language. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was her research partner from MIT, Marcus. "How's the algorithm coming? Professor Chen is excited to see your progress." Mara stared at the message for a long moment. At MIT, she was a rising star. Here, she was a diversity quota, who couldn't even get her laptop to work properly. She typed back, "Making interesting discoveries." Outside her window, the evening light painted the campus in shades of gold. Students walked in clusters, their laughter carrying on the autumn air. She recognized faces from her classes, the same faces that looked through her during group discussions, the ones that fell silent when she entered a room. Tomorrow she would try again, present her research, prove her worth, earn the recommendation that would secure her future. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of doubt. Her fingers found the keyboard again, not to code, but to research. She pulled up Whitmore Academy's publicly available data on student outcomes, demographic information, and faculty recommendations. The numbers told a story that the glossy brochures never mentioned. In the past 5 years, only 3 students from underrepresented backgrounds had received Professor Sterling's recommendation for graduate school. All 3 had been recruited athletes with perfect GPAs and family connections to major donors. The pattern was there, hidden in plain sight. But patterns, Amara knew, were just the beginning. The real question was, what to do with the information once you found it. A few minutes later, a state officer. She closed the laptop and prepared for bed, but sleep wouldn't come easily. In the darkness, she could hear Madison's soft breathing from the other side of the room, and beyond that, the whispered conversations of privilege that never quite included her voice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, for the first time since arriving at Whitmore, Amara began to formulate a plan that had nothing to do with fitting in and everything to do with standing out. The Advanced Algorithm Seminar met in Whitmore's oldest classroom, where oil paintings of dead benefactors watched over rows of polished oak desks. Professor Sterling entered with his usual theatrical flair, coffee mug in one hand, stack of papers in the other. "Today we begin group projects," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been questioned. "I've taken the liberty of forming teams based on complementary skill sets." Amara's stomach tightened. She watched as Sterling read names from his list, carefully pairing the strongest students together. Madison with Jonathan Chen, whose father owned half of Silicon Valley. Brittany Sterling, the professor's own daughter, with 2 other legacy students whose families had buildings named after them. "Ms. Washington," Sterling's voice cut through her mounting dread, "you'll be working with Mr. Davidson, Mr. Torres, and Ms. Kim." Brandon Davidson smirked from across the room. His transcript was impressive on paper, but Amara had watched him struggle with basic coding concepts for weeks. Elena Torres was pleasant enough, but seemed more interested in her social media following than her studies. Jenny Kim was brilliant at memorization, but froze whenever asked to think creatively. "Your assignment," Sterling continued, "is to design a recommendation system for e-commerce platforms. I expect innovative approaches, not textbook regurgitation." After class, Amara's new teammates gathered around her desk. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across their faces. "So," Brandon said, leaning back in his chair with practiced casualness. I'm thinking we keep this simple. Basic collaborative filtering, maybe some content-based recommendations. Nothing too complicated. Amara pulled out her notebook, pages filled with algorithmic designs that could revolutionize how recommendation systems worked. Actually, I've been developing a hybrid approach that combines machine learning with behavioral prediction. It could increase accuracy by 30%. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Elena's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it with obvious relief. That sounds ambitious, Jenny said carefully. Maybe we should start with something more manageable? Yeah, Brandon agreed, his tone patient in the way adults used with children. We want everyone to contribute equally, right? Let's keep it at a level where we can all participate. The chalk dust in the air seemed to thicken. Amara felt the familiar weight of being simultaneously overqualified and undervalued. Her algorithms could outperform anything her classmates might produce. But that expertise was being reframed as a liability. Of course, she said finally. Team effort. Brandon's smile was victorious. Great. Elena, why don't you handle the presentation slides? Jenny can work on the literature review. I'll code the basic framework, and Amara... He paused as if considering her capabilities. You can help with documentation. Documentation. The grunt work that required no creativity, no innovation, no recognition. Amara nodded with practiced grace while her mind cataloged another data point in a growing pattern. The dining hall buzzed with the controlled chaos of privileged teenagers at dinner. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables filled with students, whose casual conversations revolved around family vacations to Europe and internships at companies their parents owned. Mara sat alone at a corner table, her laptop open beside her untouched salad. She was debugging code for her personal project, the same algorithm that could have elevated her team's assignment from mediocre to groundbreaking. She's always so intense, Madison's voice carried clearly from 3 tables away. Like, we get it, you're smart. But there's a difference between being intelligent and being aggressive? Brittany Sterling nodded sympathetically. My dad says some people just aren't comfortable with collaborative learning. They're so used to being the smartest person in the room that they can't handle real academic rigor. It's actually kind of sad, Elena added, her voice dripping with false concern. I tried to include her in our study group, but she seemed so standoffish. Amara's fingers never stopped moving across the keyboard, but every word hit like a physical blow. She had never been standoffish. She had been excluded. The study groups that somehow forgot to invite her. The lunch tables that were always saving seats for someone else. The casual conversations that died when she approached. The lies were so smoothly delivered, so confidently shared, that anyone listening would assume they were truth. And maybe that was the point. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus at MIT. Check your email. Professor Chen wants to discuss your algorithm with the department head. Amara's heart lifted for a moment. At MIT, her work was recognized, valued, celebrated. Here, it was treated like a threat to be contained. She closed the laptop and stood, gathering her things with deliberate calm. As she walked past Madison's table, she noticed how the conversation immediately shifted to safer topics. Weekend plans, upcoming parties, anything but the careful character assassination she had just witnessed. She stood with her back to her, as the window stood out of her face, and did what needed. The campus security cameras tracked her movement as she left the dining hall. She found herself studying them with new interest, her algorithmic mind automatically analyzing placement, coverage angles, and blind spots. A strange habit she had developed since arriving at Whitmore. The computer lab stayed open until midnight, providing sanctuary for students who needed extra time on assignments. Amara had claimed a workstation in the back corner where she could work without drawing attention to herself. Her screens displayed 2 windows, the dumbed-down recommendation system her team was building, and her own revolutionary algorithm that could predict user behavior with unprecedented accuracy. The contrast was stark: mediocrity versus brilliance, conformity versus innovation. She had been working for 3 hours when she realized she wasn't alone. The lab supervisor, Dr. Matthews, stood behind her with crossed arms and a disapproving expression. "Ms. Washington, I need to speak with you about lab protocols." Amara saved her work and turned to face him. Dr. Matthews was Sterling's longtime friend, a man who had been passed over for tenure-track positions at better schools and had settled into administrative work at Whitmore with obvious resentment. "Is there a problem?" she asked. "Several students have complained about your monopolization of resources. You're here every night using multiple monitors running processes that slow down the entire network." Amara's code was efficient, optimized to use minimal system resources. Her own performance monitoring proved it. But defending herself would only reinforce the narrative that she was difficult, argumentative, aggressive. "I can work with fewer resources," she said. "Perhaps you should consider whether your projects are appropriate for this environment," Dr. Matthews continued. "We encourage academic ambition, but not at the expense of other students' learning experiences." The message was clear. Tone it down, blend in, don't make waves. Be grateful for the opportunity and don't remind anyone that you might actually deserve it. After he left, Amara sat in the humming silence of servers and cooling fans. She opened her personal project one more time, scrolling through lines of code that represented years of work, innovation, and dreams of changing the world. Then she closed it and returned to her team's assignment: basic collaborative filtering. Safe, predictable, forgettable. But as she worked, her mind wandered to the security cameras she had noticed earlier, the ones that tracked student movement throughout campus, the ones that recorded everything but somehow never captured the moments when her files were corrupted, her access was denied, her work was undermined. She opened a new window and began typing, not code this time, but a simple query to the campus network. Public information about system logs, access records, user activity. The kind of data that was technically available, but rarely examined. The patterns were there, waiting to be discovered. She just had to know how to look. The meeting with Professor Sterling had been scheduled for Thursday afternoon, tucked between his office hours and faculty senate obligations. Amara arrived precisely on time, her laptop bag containing both her team's mediocre project and her own revolutionary work. Sterling's office was a monument to academic achievement. Diplomas, awards, and photographs with famous colleagues covering every wall. The leather furniture smelled expensive, and the grandfather clock in the corner marked time with authoritative precision. The right way around, Sterling thought. "Miss Washington." Sterling gestured to the chair across from his massive desk. "I trust you're adapting well to our academic environment?" "Yes, sir. Though I did want to discuss my research project." "Ah, yes." Sterling's smile was patient but tired. "I've been reviewing your progress with Dr. Matthews. He's expressed some concerns about your approach." Amara's carefully prepared presentation remained unopened on her laptop. "What kind of concerns?" "Nothing serious, you understand. Simply that your working style may not be the best fit for our collaborative model. Whitmore prides itself on developing well-rounded scholars, not just technical specialists." The words were diplomatic, but the meaning was brutal. Your intelligence is a problem. Your ambition is inappropriate. Your presence is disruptive. "I see." Amara's voice remained steady despite the earthquake in her chest. "I want to be clear, your academic record is impressive. MIT should be proud of their students. But graduate school recommendations require more than raw intelligence. They required demonstrated ability to work within established frameworks, to contribute positively to academic communities. Sterling leaned back in his chair, his expression almost paternal. Perhaps you might be happier at an institution that's more aligned with your particular strengths. I'd be happy to help you explore transfer options. The offer hung in the air like a sword. Transfer away from the program that could secure her future. Accept defeat disguised as helpful guidance. Disappear quietly so everyone could pretend this conversation never happened. Thank you for the feedback, Amara said. I'll certainly consider it. She left Sterling's office, with her presentation still undelivered, her research still unacknowledged, and her future suddenly uncertain. The hallway stretched before her like a gauntlet, lined with portraits of distinguished alumni who had never faced the choice between excellence and acceptance. That night, she lay in bed listening to Madison's soft breathing and planning her next move. The algorithm on her laptop wasn't just code. It was proof of her capabilities, evidence of her worth. Demonstration of everything they refused to see. But proof, she was learning, was only valuable if people were willing to look at it. The question was, how do you force people to see what they're determined to ignore? The clock on Amara's nightstand glowed 2:47 a.m. when she finally gave up on sleep. Madison's breathing had settled into the rhythm of the genuinely unconscious, the sound of someone who had never spent a night wondering if she belonged anywhere. Amara slipped out of bed and padded to her desk, where her laptop waited in the darkness. The screen's blue glow illuminated her acceptance letter to MIT, carefully pinned to the small bulletin board above her workspace. She had read it so many times, the words were burned into her memory. We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for early admission based on your exceptional academic performance and demonstrated potential for groundbreaking research in computer science. Exceptional. Groundbreaking. The words felt like artifacts from another life. She pulled up her email and scrolled through messages from her MIT professors. Dr. Chen asking about her progress. Marcus sharing excitement about their joint publication. Her academic advisor checking in about graduate school applications. Each message was a reminder of who she had been just 6 weeks ago. A rising star, a brilliant mind, a student with unlimited potential. Here at Whitmore, she was a problem to be managed. The weight of isolation pressed down on her shoulders. She had spent her entire academic career being the smartest person in the room, the one others came to for help, the student teachers used as an example of excellence. Now, she was being told that very excellence was a character flaw. Her phone buzzed softly, a text from her mother. Can't sleep, thinking about you. Hope you're conquering that fancy school. Amara stared at the message for a long moment. Her mother worked double shifts at the hospital, cleaning rooms and emptying trash cans so her daughter could have opportunities she never had. The woman who had raised her alone after her father died, who had celebrated every academic achievement like it was a personal victory, who believed with absolute certainty that her daughter was destined for greatness. How could she explain that greatness wasn't always welcome? She typed back, still conquering, love you. The lie came easily now. Sleep finally claimed her around 4 a.m., but her dreams were filled with memories she had tried to forget. She was 16 again, standing in the Roosevelt High School gymnasium with her robotics team, watching as their carefully built robot malfunctioned during the state championship final. The machine had been perfect during practice, elegant, efficient, programmed to navigate the course with precision. But under the bright lights of competition, with hundreds of spectators watching, it had simply stopped working. The motors whirred, the sensors blinked, but nothing moved. 30 seconds, the announcer called out. Team Detroit Tech has 30 seconds to get their robot functional, or they're eliminated. Amara's teammates stood frozen, their faces pale with panic. Coach Williams started toward the robot, but Amara was already there, her hands flying over the control panel. The crowd noise faded to background static as she traced the problem through lines of code she had written herself. There, a single misplaced semicolon in the navigation subroutine. A tiny error that had cascaded into complete system failure. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with surgical precision, rewriting the function in real time while the clock counted down. 15 seconds. The robot lurched forward, its movements suddenly fluid and purposeful. It navigated the obstacle course with perfect accuracy, completing the challenge with 3 seconds to spare. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Amara barely heard them. She was staring at the screen, watching her code execute flawlessly under pressure. "How did you do that?" her teammate Marcus had asked afterward, his voice filled with awe. "I saw the pattern," she had replied simply. "When you understand the system well enough, you can predict where it will break." The memory felt like a lifetime ago. That 16-year-old girl had been confident, unshakable, certain of her abilities. She had never doubted that her intelligence was an asset, never questioned whether she deserved to be in the room. Amara woke to sunlight streaming through the dorm window and Madison's voice chattering into her phone. "No, I know, right? She's just so intense." Like, "We're trying to help her, but she makes it so difficult." The conversation continued as if Amara were invisible. Another casual assassination of her character, delivered with the breezy confidence of someone who had never been questioned. Amara lay still, listening to herself, being dissected by someone who barely knew her. "I feel bad for her, honestly," Madison continued. "It must be hard being so far from home, trying to fit in somewhere you don't really belong." The words hit like a physical blow. Not because they were cruel, but because they contained just enough truth to cut deep. Amara was far from home, struggling to fit in, questioning her place in a world that seemed determined to diminish her. But belonging wasn't about geography or demographics. It was about recognition, respect, the simple acknowledgement that she had earned her place through merit rather than charity. After Madison left for class, Amara opened her laptop and stared at the code that had consumed her life for the past 2 years. The algorithm was beautiful in its complexity, layers of machine learning models that could predict human behavior with unprecedented accuracy. It was the kind of breakthrough that could revolutionize entire industries, the culmination of everything she had learned about computer science, psychology, and human nature. She had built it in her spare time, working late into the night in MIT's computer labs, driven by curiosity and the pure joy of creation. No one had assigned it, no one had guided her, no one had told her it was possible. She had simply seen a problem and solved it, the way she had always solved problems. The same way she had debugged that robot 6 years ago. The same way she could solve the problem of Whitmore Academy, if she chose to. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as an idea began to form. Not a plan exactly, but a recognition of possibilities. The security cameras she had noticed, the network logs she had accessed, the patterns of behavior she had observed. Data was everywhere, waiting to be analyzed. Truth was hidden in plain sight, waiting to be revealed, and she had the tools to find it. The question was whether she had the courage to use them. She closed the laptop and prepared for another day of being underestimated, another day of playing the role of the grateful scholarship student who should be thankful for the opportunity. But underneath the performance, something new was stirring. The same instinct that had driven her to fix that robot, to build that algorithm, to see patterns where others saw chaos. The recognition that every system had vulnerabilities, every structure had weaknesses, every careful facade had cracks where the truth could slip through. For the first time since arriving at Whitmore, Amara Washington began to smile. The computer lab at 3 a.m. was a cathedral of humming servers and blinking lights. Amara had the place to herself, officially working on her team's basic recommendation system, but her real attention was focused on a different kind of algorithm entirely. She opened a new terminal window and began typing commands that would have made her MIT professors proud. Not the dumbed-down code her teammates expected, but the full power of her analytical mind, unleashed on a problem that mattered. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision as she accessed Whitmore Academy's publicly available data systems, student portal logs, library access records, computer lab usage statistics. All technically public information, but rarely examined in aggregate. The first pattern emerged within an hour. Over the past 5 years, students from underrepresented backgrounds had experienced technical difficulties at a rate 340% higher than their peers. File corruption, access denials, system glitches, all documented in help desk tickets that painted a picture of systematic frustration. Interesting, she murmured to herself, adding another data set to her analysis. Grade distributions told an even more compelling story. Students of color consistently received lower marks on subjectively graded assignments, while their performance on objective tests remained competitive. The statistical significance was undeniable, but the pattern had been invisible until someone bothered to look. By 4 a.m., she had built a comprehensive model of discrimination at Whitmore Academy. Not the obvious, overt kind that made headlines, but the subtle, systemic variety that slowly crushed spirits and limited opportunities. Death by 1,000 small cuts, each one deniable on its own, but devastating in aggregate. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus at MIT. "Your algorithm is incredible. Professor Chen wants to submit it to the National Science Foundation conference. This could change everything." Amara stared at the message, then at her screen, filled with evidence of institutional bias. 2 different worlds, 2 different versions of herself. In one, she was a rising star, destined for greatness. In the other, she was a problem to be solved. But problems, she had learned, could be turned into solutions with the right approach. The next morning brought a stroke of luck disguised as misfortune. During Professor Sterling's lecture on network security, the classroom projector malfunctioned, leaving him unable to display his carefully prepared slides. "Ms. Washington," he said with obvious reluctance, "perhaps you could assist with the technical difficulties?" Amara approached the podium with practiced calm, her fingers dancing across the control panel. The fix was simple, a loose cable connection. But she took her time, studying the room's audio-visual setup with new interest. "There we go," she announced as the projector sprang to life. "Thank you," Sterling said curtly, "though I do hope our technology proves more reliable for your group presentation next week." The comment was meant as a reminder of her laptop's conveniently timed failure, but Amara heard something else entirely, an opportunity. After class, she lingered in the empty lecture hall, ostensibly packing her bag but actually memorizing every detail of the room's setup. Camera placements, network access points, wireless signal strength. Her mind cataloged vulnerabilities like a general surveying a battlefield. Madison appeared beside her with predatory friendliness. "Ready for the big presentation? I heard Professor Sterling is inviting some board members to observe our projects." "Board members?" Amara kept her voice neutral despite her racing pulse. "Oh, yes. Daddy mentioned it last night. Something about showcasing student innovation to potential donors." Madison's smile was sharp as broken glass. "I'm sure you'll do fine, though. Simple projects are often the most reliable." The insult was wrapped in false encouragement, but Amara barely heard it. Board members meant an audience beyond Sterling's classroom, witnesses who might be interested in patterns of bias and discrimination, people with the power to demand accountability. I'm sure we will, Amara replied, her mind already racing ahead to possibilities. That evening, she put her plan into motion. Her algorithm had identified the perfect test case, a vulnerability in the campus network that would allow her to document everything she needed. Not hacking, exactly, but creative use of publicly available access points. She positioned herself in the library's computer lab, surrounded by students cramming for midterms. Her laptop displayed her team's presentation materials, but her real work happened in background processes invisible to casual observers. The security cameras throughout campus were connected to a centralized system, their feeds archived for 30 days before being overridden. Most of the footage was routine. Students walking to class, studying in common areas, normal campus life. But buried in terabytes of mundane recordings were the moments that mattered. Her algorithm sifted through hours of footage with mechanical precision, identifying instances where her access card had failed, where her files had been accessed by unauthorized users, where conversations about her had taken place in supposedly private spaces. The evidence was damning. Madison's digital fingerprints on Amara's corrupted files, Brandon discussing strategies to keep her in line during group work, Dr. Matthews disabling her computer lab access after she left each evening, then restoring it before she returned. But the most devastating discovery came from Sterling's office camera. A conversation between the professor and several colleagues, their voices carrying clearly through the room's expensive acoustics. The Washington girl is becoming problematic, Sterling's voice was unmistakable. Too ambitious, too visible. We need to manage the situation before it reflects poorly on the program. Agreed, replied a voice Amara recognized as Dr. Matthews. I've been limiting her access to resources, but she's persistent. Perhaps a failing grade on the group project would send the appropriate message, suggested a third voice. Collaborative skills are essential for graduate school recommendations. The conversation continued for 12 minutes. A masterclass in systematic exclusion disguised as academic mentorship. They discussed her like a problem to be solved rather than a student to be educated. Their bias so casual and complete that they saw nothing wrong with engineering her failure. Amara saved the file with trembling fingers. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline rush of finally having proof. Concrete, undeniable evidence that her experiences weren't imagined, her struggles weren't personal failings, her suspicions weren't paranoia. The group presentation was scheduled for Friday afternoon in the Academy's most prestigious lecture hall. Amara arrived early, ostensibly to test the audio-visual equipment, but actually to plant the seeds of her counterattack. Her teammates trickled in over the next hour, each bringing their assigned portions of their safely mediocre project. Brandon carried the flash drive containing their presentation, while Elena practiced her opening remarks and Jenny reviewed their deliberately simplified conclusions. Remember, Brandon said as they set up, we want to hit all the basic points without getting too technical. Keep it accessible. Amara nodded agreeably while uploading her own presentation to the room's network server. A backup plan, she told herself, though she knew it was really the main event. The audience began filing in at 1:50 p.m. Professor Sterling entered with his usual theatrical authority, followed by several people Amara didn't recognize. Board members, she realized, noting their expensive suits and practiced smiles. The decision-makers Madison had mentioned. At exactly 2 p.m., Sterling called for attention. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our Student Innovation Showcase. Today, you'll see the finest examples of collaborative learning and academic excellence that Whitmore Academy has to offer. The first 3 groups presented their projects with polished competence, safe, predictable work that demonstrated technical skill without challenging any assumptions or pushing any boundaries. Each presentation earned polite applause and encouraging nods from the board members. Then it was their turn. Brandon approached the podium with confidence born of privilege and mediocrity. Good afternoon. Our team has developed a basic recommendation system for e-commerce platforms using established collaborative filtering techniques. The presentation unfolded exactly as rehearsed. Elena explained their methodology with memorized precision. Jenny outlined their literature review with academic thoroughness. Brandon demonstrated their functional but unremarkable code. Throughout it all, Amara stood silently at the side of the stage, playing her assigned role as the grateful team member whose contributions were too minor to mention. The documentation specialist, the note-taker. The diversity quota earning her place through charity rather than merit. 23 minutes into their allotted 30-minute slot, Brandon reached their conclusion slide. In summary, our recommendation system achieves baseline performance using proven methodologies. We believe this demonstrates the value of collaborative learning and measured academic ambition. The applause was polite but perfunctory. Sterling nodded approvingly while the board members checked their phones. Another safe, forgettable presentation from students who knew their place. Thank you, Sterling began, for that thorough demonstration of... Actually, Amara's voice cut through the settling applause. Let me show you something else. The room fell silent. Brandon's face went pale as Amara approached the podium, her movements calm and deliberate despite the earthquake in her chest. Ms. Washington, Sterling's voice carried a warning. Your team's presentation time has concluded. This will only take a moment, she replied, her fingers already dancing across the control panel. The screen flickered, displaying not their safe, mediocre conclusion, but something entirely different. Her algorithm's interface filled the massive display, elegant code flowing across the screen like digital poetry, real-time data analysis, predictive modeling, machine learning that bent the curve of possibility into new shapes. This is what I actually built, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. A behavioral prediction algorithm that achieves 97% accuracy in modeling human decision patterns. Gasps rippled through the audience. She heard Dr. Matthews whisper urgently to Sterling, but their voices seemed to come from another universe. But that's not why you're here, Amara continued, advancing to the next slide. You're here to see what this algorithm discovered when I turned it on Whitmore Academy itself. The screen filled with data visualizations that painted a picture no amount of eloquent denial could erase. Statistical proof of systematic bias, documented evidence of deliberate sabotage, recorded conversations that stripped away any pretense of academic integrity. For the past 5 years, she said, her voice steady as a surgeon's hand, students from underrepresented backgrounds have been systematically undermined, excluded, and manipulated out of this program. Not through overt discrimination, but through 1,000 small cuts designed to look like academic struggles. The silence in the room was deafening. Board members leaned forward in their seats, their polite disinterest replaced by sharp attention. Sterling's face had gone ashen, while Madison slumped in her chair as if trying to become invisible. The evidence is comprehensive, Amara continued, clicking to the next slide. File corruption patterns that target specific students, grade distributions that show clear bias in subjective assessments, access restrictions that mysteriously affect only certain demographics. He paused, letting the weight of documentation settle over the room like a heavy blanket. And most damning of all, recorded conversations where faculty members openly discuss strategies for forcing qualified students to fail or transfer, preserving the Academy's traditional standards through systematic exclusion. The final slide displayed Sterling's own words, transcribed with brutal accuracy. His voice filled the room through the sound system, discussing Amara like a problem to be eliminated, rather than a student to be educated. When the recording ended, the silence stretched until it became unbearable. Then, slowly, one of the board members began to clap. Others joined, the applause building until it thundered through the hall like an avalanche of vindication. Amara stood at the podium, watching years of careful prejudice crumble under the weight of her documented truth. Sterling's face was a mask of panic and rage, while her teammates stared at her, with expressions ranging from awe to terror. "Questions?" she asked the stunned audience, though she knew the real questions would come later, in boardrooms and legal offices where accountability had teeth. For the first time since arriving at Whitmore Academy, Amara Washington felt like herself again. Not the grateful scholarship student or the problematic minority, but the brilliant young woman who could see patterns where others saw chaos, who could build solutions where others saw only problems, who could turn their own weapons against them with devastating precision. The aftermath hit like a controlled explosion. The moment Amara finished her presentation, the lecture hall erupted into chaos that felt both inevitable and surreal. Board members rose from their seats, their expensive suits rustling with urgent movement. Sterling stood frozen at the front of the room, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and dawning terror. "This is preposterous," he finally managed, his voice cracking with desperation. "This student has clearly manipulated data to support false allegations." "Professor Sterling," the voice belonged to Margaret Whitmore Chen, the Academy's board chair and great-granddaughter of the school's founder. Her tone carried the authority of old money and older power. "I think we've heard enough." The room fell silent except for the soft clicking of smartphones as students and faculty frantically documented the moment. Elena had tears streaming down her face. Whether from shame or shock was unclear. Brandon sat slumped in his chair, staring at Amara like she had materialized from another dimension. "Brandon," Dr. Matthews tried to approach the podium, perhaps to shut down the presentation system, but Margaret's sharp look froze him in place. "Don't," she said simply. "If I may," another board member spoke up. Thomas Harrison, whose tech company had donated millions to the Academy's computer science program. "Ms. Washington, this algorithm you've developed, how long did it take you to build?" "2 years," Amara replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I started it as a freshman at MIT. And you accomplished this analysis in how much time?" 3 days. Harrison nodded slowly, his expression a mixture of admiration and concern. "Remarkable work, absolutely remarkable." Madison had gone completely pale, her perfect composure finally cracking under the weight of documented evidence. She whispered something to Brittany Sterling, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the mahogany paneling. "The board will need to review this evidence thoroughly," Margaret announced, her voice cutting through the nervous chatter. "Dr. Sterling, you and your colleagues will make yourselves available for questioning immediately." Sterling's attempt at protest died in his throat as Margaret's gaze swept over him like a cold wind. This wasn't just about one professor's bias anymore. It was about the Academy's reputation, its accreditation, its carefully cultivated image of excellence and integrity. "Ms. Washington," Margaret continued, "would you be willing to provide the board with copies of your analysis and supporting documentation?" "Of course," Amara replied. "I've prepared a comprehensive report with all source materials and methodology clearly documented." "Excellent." Margaret's smile was sharp as a blade. "We'll be in touch very soon." The next hour passed in a blur of urgent conversations and hastily called meetings. Students filtered out of the lecture hall in small groups, their voices hushed but excited. Word was already spreading across campus through social media and text messages. By dinner time, everyone would know that the quiet scholarship student had just exposed systematic discrimination at one of America's most prestigious preparatory academies. Amara found herself alone in the empty lecture hall, staring at the screen that still displayed her data visualizations. The evidence that had taken 3 days to compile and 30 minutes to present would likely reshape Whitmore Academy for generations to come. Her phone buzzed with a call from MIT. Professor Chen's name appeared on the screen, and Amara answered with trembling fingers. "Amara!" Chen's voice was breathless with excitement. "I just got a call from Margaret Whitmore, Chen. She told me what happened. Are you all right?" "I think so," Amara replied, though she wasn't entirely sure what all right meant anymore. "What you did today, the technical achievement, the courage, the integrity, it's extraordinary. The board wants to fast-track a formal investigation, and they've asked MIT to provide expert witnesses to verify your methodology." Amara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of accomplishment and exhaustion in equal measure. "What happens now?" "Now you come home," Chen said gently. "Your real work is waiting for you here." Within 48 hours, the dominoes began falling with mathematical precision. The Academy's board launched a formal investigation into Sterling's conduct, suspending him pending review. Dr. Matthews resigned rather than face questioning about his role in sabotaging student access to computer resources. Madison was called before the Student Disciplinary Committee to explain her digital fingerprints on corrupted files. Her carefully constructed facade of innocent privilege crumbled under direct questioning, revealing a systematic campaign of harassment that went far beyond simple social exclusion. The story broke in the education press first, then spread to mainstream media as journalists recognized the broader implications. "Elite Academy exposed for systematic discrimination by brilliant students' algorithm" became a headline that generated thousands of shares and comments from people who had experienced similar treatment in academic and professional settings. Amara's phone rang constantly with interview requests, speaking opportunities, and offers from universities hoping to recruit her. Harvard, Stanford, Caltech, institutions that had once seemed impossibly distant, were now competing for her attention. But the call that mattered most came from Marcus at MIT. "The National Science Foundation wants to feature your algorithm at their annual conference," he said, his voice bubbling with excitement. "And 3 major tech companies have already inquired about licensing opportunities." "For real?" Amara found herself laughing, for the first time in weeks. "For real. You're not just brilliant, Amara, you're about to be famous." The final board meeting took place in Whitmore's Grand Conference Room, where oil paintings of distinguished alumni looked down on a very different kind of distinguished gathering. Margaret Whitmore Chen sat at the head of the polished table, flanked by fellow board members whose expressions ranged from stern to apologetic. Amara entered the room to find Sterling already seated, his usual confidence replaced by the hunched posture of a man whose career was effectively over. Beside him sat a lawyer whose expensive suit couldn't disguise the hopelessness of his client's position. "Ms. Washington," Margaret began, "the board has completed its investigation into your allegations. We want to personally apologize for the treatment you experienced and thank you for bringing these serious issues to our attention." "Anne Franklin," the woman said, "everyone has the full truth at the start of every hearing." She slid a thick folder across the table. "Our findings confirm every aspect of your analysis. Professor Sterling will not be returning to Whitmore Academy. Dr. Matthews has already submitted his resignation, and we're implementing comprehensive reforms to prevent this kind of discrimination from ever happening again." He stirred alone. In stills of legal documents, his eyes finding Amara's across the table. "You have no idea what you've done," he said quietly, his voice carrying neither anger nor threat, just the hollow recognition of defeat. "I know exactly what I did," Amara replied, her voice calm as still water. "I solved a problem." The board offered her a formal recommendation letter, not just from the Academy, but personally signed by Margaret herself. They offered financial compensation for her suffering. They offered a public apology and recognition of her exceptional contributions to the institution. But what Amara treasured most was simpler: the knowledge that her brilliance had been seen, acknowledged, and celebrated, that her voice had been heard, that her truth had become undeniable. As she walked across Whitmore's campus one final time, students she had never spoken to nodded respectfully. Faculty members who had once looked through her now met her eyes with something approaching awe. The security cameras that had once tracked her every movement now seemed like friendly witnesses to her triumph. Her algorithm had started as a tool for predicting human behavior. It had become something far more powerful, a weapon for exposing human prejudice and demanding accountability from those who believed themselves untouchable. This is exactly the kind of story Beat Stories was created to tell, where quiet brilliance refuses to stay silent. 6 months later, Amara Washington stood before a packed auditorium at the National Science Foundation's annual conference. Her algorithm displayed on screens, visible to researchers from around the world. The same code that had exposed systematic bias at Whitmore Academy was now being implemented by universities across the country to identify and eliminate discrimination in their own programs. "The beautiful thing about data," she told the audience, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to trust her own brilliance, "is that it doesn't lie. It simply reveals patterns that people prefer to keep hidden." The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. Back at MIT, her lab hummed with activity. A diverse team of graduate students worked alongside her, developing applications for her behavioral prediction algorithm that ranged from identifying bias in hiring practices to detecting systemic inequities in healthcare delivery. Major tech companies had offered her millions for licensing rights, but Amara had chosen a different path, making the core methodology freely available to researchers working on social justice applications. Her phone displayed hundreds of messages from students around the world who had watched videos of her Whitmore presentation. Young women of color writing to thank her for showing them what was possible. Scholarship students who had felt invisible until they saw someone like themselves refuse to be silenced. Black stories, touching stories, real-life stories of people finding courage in her example. The impact rippled outward in ways she never could have predicted. Whitmore Academy had hired its first diversity officer and implemented mandatory bias training for all faculty. Professor Sterling had been quietly forced into early retirement, his academic reputation permanently tarnished. Madison had transferred to a different school, though her family's donations to Whitmore mysteriously continued. Marcus burst through her lab door with his usual enthusiasm, waving a printed email. "You're not going to believe this. Stanford wants to endow a chair in your name, the Margaret Washington Center for Algorithmic Justice." Amara looked up from her coat, smiling at the irony. "I'm 19 years old. You're also a genius who changed the world." Details. That evening, she video-called her mother in Detroit. The hospital shift had been long, but her mom's smile could have powered the entire city. "I saw the article in the newspaper," her mother said, pride radiating through the screen. "My baby on the front page of the Detroit Free Press. Local student's algorithm exposes elite school bias." "The headline's a little dramatic," Amara laughed. "Sometimes drama is exactly what the world needs." Her mother was right. The quiet, persistent brilliance that had always defined Amara had found its voice in the most unexpected way. By refusing to be diminished, by trusting her instincts, by turning the tools of exclusion into weapons of accountability, she had proven something that went far beyond algorithms and data analysis. Intelligence has no color, gender, or background, only dedication and opportunity. The message was simple, but its implications were revolutionary. In a world that still struggled to recognize talent in unexpected packages, Amara's story served as proof that brilliance would always find a way to shine through, especially when it refuses to be hidden. Her algorithm continued running in the background, quietly analyzing patterns and exposing truths. But her real legacy was walking through the world with the unshakable knowledge that she belonged wherever her mind could take her. and her mind, it turned out, could take her anywhere. This story represents just one example of the countless bright minds who face discrimination in academic and professional settings every day. From elite prep schools to corporate boardrooms, systematic bias continues to limit opportunities for talented individuals, based on factors that have nothing to do with their capabilities. At Beat Stories, we believe every voice deserves to be heard, especially those that challenge injustice. Have you witnessed or experienced similar discrimination in your own educational or professional journey? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience matters, and your voice could inspire our next story. If this story resonated with you, please share this video with someone who needs to hear Amara's message. Subscribe to Beat Stories for more inspiring real-life stories of people who refuse to be silenced. Comment with your thoughts on how we can continue building more inclusive institutions. Remember, every time someone like Amara stands up to systematic discrimination, they make it easier for the next person to do the same. Change happens one algorithm, one exposed truth, one courageous voice at a time. What pattern of injustice do you think Beat Stories should expose next? Let us know in the comments. Your suggestion might inspire our next investigation. Like this video if you believe talent deserves recognition regardless of background, and subscribe to Beat Stories if you want to see more stories of quiet brilliance making loud impact. Together, we can ensure that touching stories like Amara's become testimonies to progress, rather than reminders of how far we still have to go. Because at Beat Stories, we don't just tell stories. We expose the truth that needs to be heard.